Welcome to WDWNT, Drawn from the Vault. Join our panel for an examination of Disney film history from Snow White to the present day. Now, here's your host, Ron Deanna.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of WDWNT's Drawn from the Vault. We're going to be going over the history of a lot of Disney films and doing a critical review of them. We're going to be starting with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and working our way through the animated classics from Disney feature animation. We may occasionally stray from that and go to some other things, but that's the plan from now. If people are still watching at the end, we'll probably move on to some live action and some other things. But I'd like to introduce our panel. First, from WDWNT's Around the Hub, Patrick Hackett.
Hi.
From the WDWNT podcast, Ashley Jasmer.
Hey, everybody.
And she was probably on one episode about 5 years ago. My wife, Laurel, is here.
Hello.
And I'm Ron Deanna from Nerd Alert and other shows around WDWNT. So let's get into our first topic of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Not dwarves, which is something that kind of bothers me as a name. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But we're going to start off with the history of the film. And as we know, that history really starts, with the history of Disney animation back in Kansas City and Walt before he moves to Hollywood. The history really starts in 1934 when Walt sends all of his animators out to dinner and then calls them all back in for a meeting, announcing that they're going to do their first feature. He brings everybody into the room and then acts out the entire movie by himself up in front of all of his animators and story guys. And then announces, this is going to be our first feature. So obviously the idea of a full-length animated feature doesn't seem that odd to us now, but at the time it was considered really revolutionary. There were the technical aspects of a feature-length animation, including animating humans, which is something Disney hadn't really done at the time. There was also the public opinion about a full-length animated feature, whether it would hurt you physically, so many bright colors for so long in your eyes, or even kind of drive you crazy from those same colors. There is actually a common misconception that Snow White was the first full-length animated film. But that actually goes back to a film called El Postal all the way back into 1917. I couldn't find this film when I was looking in the history here, but this was something I had always had a misconception about, that Snow White was the first animated film in the world, or feature-length animated film in the world. I think we've all kind of heard that, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently Snow White was about the sixth one, but it was the first one from any kind of to really get any notoriety that I could tell. The other thing that people had a problem trying to overcome with the idea of a full-length animated feature was, can an animated feature sustain a story and sustain the pathos you get for the characters?
Traditionally, these shorts were only about
minutes long and were nothing really but a loose story around a series of gags. And people really thought that's what any kind of animated feature would be in the future. And, Walt wanted to make sure that wasn't what happened here. So public opinion was something they'd have to confront with the finished product of the film. But the technical aspects were something Walt and his animators could really handle. The greatest technical leap forward was probably the multiplane camera. That's a large camera rig where each layer of the drawing is put on a different sheet of glass. There could be multiple ones, and they could be moved apart from each other independently. Previous to this, all the cells were kind of laid out flat on the table, and images looked kind of flat. So if you wanted to zoom in on the foreground, you zoomed in on the background at the same time, which would mean if you want to zoom in on, the characters, you see the moon in the background coming in at the exact same rate, which isn't what happens in reality. So the multiplane camera solved this by being able to move that one plane of the foreground characters forward by leaving the background where it was. This was a creation of Bob Iwerks, who's been with Disney on and off since before the creation of Mickey Mouse and was one of the people instrumental in creating that original Steamboat Willie. He and Walt had their conflicts and had gone on to create his own studio. The other major technical aspects that they needed to overcome weren't technologies themselves, but the skill of the animators. They really haven't worked with humans before. And I know this might not sound too different, but we are so familiar with how humans move and interact in the flow of people walking and waving their hands that this looks really different to even a anthropomorphic mouse walking and waving his hands. People are going to notice that a human doesn't walk right. So to work on this, the animators went to classes after they were done drawing for the day. And many of the animators practiced with rotoscoping, which is taking a film of someone acting out the scene and then tracing over it. This wasn't really tracing using the film, but they would have the rotoscope next to it and they would draw, what they saw in the film to kind of mimic that. So the flow of a dress will look natural, steps in a dance will look natural. But this really helped get that natural feel for the human characters in this.
There is a ton of Wikipedia material out there if anyone wants to learn more about rotoscoping. This isn't necessarily something that Walt Disney invented, but I'd say from what I read, it sounds like they really perfected it. And what was really interesting about it was at the time when they were using it, all of the animators didn't want to admit that they were using it, or it was really common for them to have a significant person, the character in the movie that absolutely they never rotoscoped. That was a little gem for them, saying these are my skills. My skills are amazing. I didn't rotoscope this character. But I mean, in all honesty, I think they really needed it in order to better perfect the look of what humans need to look like. So
I think we're all really familiar with some of the acting. I mean, we've seen clips of it that was rotoscoped onto the film.
absolutely.
And a lot of people would, other studios have used rotoscoping in the past, but instead of just tracing it and using that tracing on the cells, the Disney animators would actually take that little bit and draw it again. So they weren't just tracing, they were doing another round. So they would add in at least their minds, it seems, some extra art to just that. And
rather than just tracing over.
So one of the other major challenges they had was the effects animation. Things like rain, lightning, fire, the transformation of the witch were all something new, at least on the scale and the lifelike quality that they wanted for this. The multiplane camera was part of what they used to develop these effects, and they actually tested all of this out on a short called The Old Mill, which was part of the Silly Symphony set, and was actually won the Oscar. But that's where a lot of these effects were first seen, and that came out just a couple of years.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, I mean, they had so they started the production with that story meeting in 1934, and the movie came out in December of 37 for the premiere. So they had a lot of time to work all these effects out.
It's crazy to think about all that being brand new because it looks so natural and it looks like it's always been there and it's always belonged. So it's weird to think, and I'm learning a lot while we did the research for the show, that's new. It felt like it just fit in.
Totally state of the art.
Yeah.
And I've watched a lot of other DVD commentaries on animated films and things like The Simpsons or Futurama, and they talk about the effects animators, and I was, in my head, it's like, it's all a drawing, what's the difference? And kind of looking at some of these books that go into the history of it and some of the special features on the DVD and Blu-ray, really there is something different than just drawing a person, which was also something new to them. They've done some characters, The first real attempt, I think, was the Goddess of Spring, Silly Symphony, which was the closest to real humans we'd had at the Disney shop. I mean, there were characters like Betty Boop, who did a Snow White movie slightly before, or a Snow White story slightly before this, but she wasn't a realistic looking character. She was an exaggerated character, so those exaggerated movements kind of play into it. So they worked on this film almost immediately up to its release in 1937. There's a semi-famous story of their screening it, and they get to the final scene, and Walt's not happy with the way the prince is moving. I believe the way I heard it was he looked like he was kind of floating as he's walking away, and Walt wants to take it back and reanimate it, and Roy's just like, no, we don't have the money, we don't have the time. He could shudder, and at this point, I don't think Walt could just send Roy on vacation and do it his own way again like he would in the future. And money had been a big problem for this film. When they originally discussed it, the budget was supposed to be about $250,000, which I know today sounds absurd, but at the time that was a lot of money. By the end of it, it cost, I've seen the estimates anywhere from $1.5 million to $1.75 million, depending on what source. I believe the final number for the budget I had written down here was about $1.5 million, which would be about $25 million in adjusted dollars. So that's still low, but films in general cost so much more. I mean, Star Wars cost $10 million in 1976 dollars to make, while I don't even want to remember what Rogue One cost.
I was going to say, and it seems especially because they were on, it wasn't necessarily their own. They borrowed a lot of that money too, correct? For Snow White?
Yeah,
so that makes it an even bigger deal that they went over budget.
And that was part of the reason Walt wanted to do a feature. They made some money doing these animated shorts, but they were never the big draw. They didn't have the negotiating power of a feature with the distributors, and all the distributors at the time kind of owned the exhibition halls or had exclusive deals. Like, this screen would only show Paramount movies, and this theater would only show RKO. Well, Paramount wasn't at the time, but you get that. Like, this would only show MGM, and this would only show RKO. So Walt didn't really have the negotiating power that the larger ones. I think he just distributed through United Artists at the time, or who his original deal was. I don't have that in front of me. I know it changed a couple times. I think it changed to RKO, and he got a little bit more for the shorts. But he really needed that feature money if he wanted to grow the studio in any way. So they didn't have, the budget to go and do this film. They borrowed and they borrowed and they borrowed, and nobody really had faith in the movie. They did go to Bank of America at one point, and the loan officer there was familiar with the film industry, so he would go out to the studio and he'd discuss it with them.
And they brought him down to see an uncompleted version of the film.
And he sat there, watched the whole movie, completely silent, gets out, and Roy's walking to his car, still pretty quiet, and he just turns to Roy and just basically says, "That movie is going to make so much money. What do you need?"
And that guy is a genius. I mean, if you look today, it's number 10 on the all-time adjusted box office list for domestic gross. It's Disney's only entry in the top 10. It's insane to think that this movie almost wasn't made, and it's one of the only good things Bank of America has ever done.
Well, and I think we just take for granted even the fact that Walt came up with this idea, because again, it hadn't really been done to any success. And so just to think, okay, I want to grow my studio, the answer wasn't putting out even more shorts. The answer was, well, I'm just going to make a feature-length film, and that's going to be the bulk of what we do here now.
I think it's the difference in the way that they decided to grow their business. Instead of doing high volume, low margin, they wanted to flip it. You know, they wanted to do lower volume, higher margin. I mean, that's what you do when you want to grow market share. So it really does, in some ways, kind of add a little bit more obvious sense that Walt had as an individual. I mean, he wasn't just an artist. He obviously was a businessman and a perfectionist. So, you know, with Roy together, I think that's really where you kind of have the boost in power. That's why they were able to be so successful, because both of them could see the art and the business.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of those numbers. So we said the budget at the time was about $1.5 million. When it came out in its initial run, it made $3.5 million domestic and about $7.8 million international, which is a great return for them. Excuse me. Even though they don't get all those receipts, they got a good chunk of it, and that allowed them to build their new studio and to finance other projects and move on. 1938 release. Premiered in 37, went to a wide release in 1938. And then was released about every 7 or so years. And this was what Disney used to do. Before there was home video and everything, every so often they'd re-release a film and use, you know, that money to fund what was going forward. So it came out again in February of 44, February of 52, April of 58, June of 67, December of 75. And from here on out, I have the actual numbers of what these movies grossed in these releases alone. So in the July 15th, 1983 release, it made $30 million in just that release in 1983 dollars. That was the 23rd highest grossing film of 1983. That's the year. That's the year of Return of the Jedi.
Wow.
It came out again in 1987. This time making $46.5 million, and was the 22nd highest grossing film of the year. And then the final release was in July of 93, where it made about $42 million and came in 36th for the year. After that, it was released on VHS in 94, DVD in October of 2001, 2009, the Blu-ray came out. And so its lifetime gross was $185 million domestic. Adjusted, that's $963.5 million.
Wow.
Its worldwide gross over all those releases was $418.2 million for 1.6 plus billion in adjusted international. And on top of that, Hi Ho and Whistle While You Work were both top 10 singles.
Wow.
And I believe this was the first soundtrack ever released for a film. This movie was going to revolutionize film, and it did. I don't think anyone's ever going to be arguing that this might not be one of the 5 most important films of all time.
Definitely. I mean, it's if without this and the returns from it, I mean, we're not even looking at the Disney company, the way this set the stage in so many ways.
I don't think we get other spectacular films like The Wizard of Oz was greenlit because it was another fantasy film right after this. So let's get into the story development here. It started with that story meeting in 1934. And it's obviously based off old fairy tales, most notably written down in about 1812 in the Grimm versions. However, the version we have on screen is heavily influenced by a 1912 play produced by Winthrop Ames, and that was made into a 1916 film. So Walt had seen the 1916 version of Winthrop Ames's play, starring Marguerite Clark as Snow White, and this was a big influence on his early storytelling and his future career. But he really wanted to take that story and strip it down to the base elements. Gone was the death of Snow White's father, and how the queen came into the picture, and all these little things. He really wanted to just make a simple story out of it. And, we always consider him the master storyteller, and I kind of got to ask the question, was this because he knew that was the best way for the story in this case, or was it because he knew putting too much story in there was just going to cost a lot more money to animate?
I don't think it was a money thing. It's never a money thing with Walt. If you ask Roy, it becomes a money thing. But he just seems to know. And we always credit Walt Disney with the absentee family type stuff, but it's interesting that he actually pulled the reasoning behind that and just gives us the character the way she is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Walt, it definitely seems that it's instinctual, the ability to make the story the highlight, or to know when is the right time to put this element into the story, or what right away, edit this out. It just definitely seems to be his forte. I don't think it was always a money thing.
Even in the first scene, like, we don't get a lot of exposition leading into, the queen, finding out that Snow is the fairest. The entire exposition is 2 pages of the opening in the book, where they, made a storybook, filmed 2 pages in live action, and then cut right to the queen out that she's been surpassed. And then, we meet the prince. We don't know who he is. We just kind of get the feeling of who he is. It's the original version of the story that they had was actually like this whole romantic comedy meet cute. That was, even back then, that's what the romantic comedies had. But there's not a lot of dialogue. It's all the song.
I was going to say, there's almost none, right? Like, he starts singing, or she's singing, and he pops over the wall.
Right.
And
That's
then
exactly it.
And then switches the song to
the one song or whatever. Is that...
Yeah, it goes from I'm Wishing right into it's called One Song. There's just such movement in the beginning of the film. It just is kind of going really fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they do it so well and so beautifully. You definitely take for granted the fact that, there is no exposition. Again, you don't even know his name. You're just kind of, the story is already in motion, and they catch up a little bit with those first 2 pages, and then it's already going, and it's so beautiful. It takes you in right away, that you're not even stopping to think, well, that's kind of weird that he's just popping over the wall and she's singing, and he starts singing to her, and instant fireworks. Nobody's stopping to say, hey, why are you peeking over my wall? With the queen.
It's a different movie in 2017.
I totally agree. Every character in the entire scene, nobody's freaked out, nobody's weirded out.
And everybody just is their character. He's the handsome, charming prince. She's the beautiful maiden princess. And the evil queen is there staring, glaring up, in the castle. And instantly, whoever all the players are, and pretty much what's going to happen. But they do it so well. And I love it. The opening is probably one of my favorite parts.
And it's a simplistic storytelling that we probably lose a lot today. I was just listening to a really great podcast called Dead Pilot Society, where they revisit dead television pilots, and they talk about one of the frustrations that writers have is everybody needs to say exactly what they want or need, and everything needs to be laid out. And we don't give the audience enough credit, and that's really great that Walt just jumped you into this story. This is where it is, and we're going with it.
And this does it without dialogue. It just gives you such archetypes that they're right there. We never get the prince's name ever. Even if you look at some of the artwork in some of the resorts that gives the beast a name, it still just says the prince for Snow White. I've seen some places he's called Ferdinand, but I think that's in some of the other Disney storybooks. But the whole movie, 2 of the main characters never get a name.
I think part of the beauty of this film, though, is the unanswered questions. And I think that's obviously the technique that Walt was using for storytelling. He was like, I want people to stay and watch the second half. So I better keep the mystery alive so they'll stay. Then in the beginning, I think that was partly what they were concerned about, was that people weren't going to stay past 20, 30 minutes. because that's what they were used to. All the cartoons would be about 30 minutes before whatever movie they'd watch, or 30 minutes at the end of whatever movie they had seen. So I think that was very smart.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things Walt changed was the flight through the woods. In the Ames play in the movie, it wasn't made to be as scary as it was in this version, because those versions were made specifically for children, and Walt refused to do anything specifically for children. He wanted to make something children would enjoy, but adults aren't going to balk at either. Because I forget the exact quote, something about if you aim for children, you're dead in the water, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, the animal guides at the end were there, but they were just simple animals to guide Snow White to the dwarf's cottage, not, this whole scene. I mean, you can't do that with live action. And I think that's one of the brilliance parts of this movie is he made he did it to show what animation is capable of that live action could never do. And as those scenes where she's singing to the animals, they're interacting with her, they're singing back. I don't care how well trained your birds are. They're not going to
fly back.
They're not
No.
going to sing off key to make a joke.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to just that wonderful storytelling that he has, there were scarier parts in the movie for me growing up, but even as a kid, you didn't quite understand what the huntsman was saying when he told her that she had to run away. But when she's running through the woods and it was, it is genuinely scary and she's terrified and, she's imagining all the logs as alligators and things like that. Even if you didn't understand why the huntsman was telling her to run away, you still understood that it was bad. You still understood that it was scary and that this was not a good thing. There wasn't, again, I don't know what the play had as far as, it was kind of funny and cutesy. He understood that it needed to be that way to at least, the parents understood what was going on with what the huntsman was saying. The kids will understand because she's running through the woods and she's scared.
Mm-hmm.
It's that family storytelling of being able to help everybody know what's going on in the story.
Yeah, one thing I didn't remember was how intense the scene with the huntsman was.
Mm-hmm.
She's singing to the bird, trying to get it back to its nest, and you just see the huntsman sneaking up behind her in the shadow, and then he's really completely about to stab her before he drops the knife. I didn't realize how close it was.
Yeah.
In that version. I don't think that's something you would do if you were aiming for kids.
Right.
No.
Can we go back and comment for a second about the animals and this special relationship she has with animals? It's always a good sign that the number one spoofed element of Disney ever is pretty much like this concept of a princess talking to animals in the forest.
Yeah.
It's spoofed everywhere. So obviously Disney knew it was good because nobody would spoof it if we all didn't remember it and know how awesome it is.
Well, and that's one of the things that they said when they were developing the story was her interaction with that little bird that's lost really does change the huntsman's mind, that he sees how good and pure she is by her trying to save this little bird, that he can't go through with it. So it wasn't just, for cutesy, plush like it would be, to sell plush like it would be today. It had a real story element to it. But the most famous thing Walt added to the story has to be the names of the dwarves. The traditional versions sometimes had simple names, just Tom, Dick, and Harry kind of names. But he was the one that gave them the names to give them the distinct personalities. We all know, the Seven Dwarfs, which... Doc, Happy, Sleepy, Grumpy, Bashful, Dopey.
Happy?
Got happy.
Mm.
Sneezy.
Ill-tempered.
They're always hard. It's a joke that they're always the hardest thing to say without writing down. But some of the ones they passed on include awful.
Oh, I want to see that, please.
This is, by the way, to give you a peek behind the curtain, everyone. This is the absolute best part of this show is learning these other names of dwarves. It's amazing. Go ahead, Rod. This is incredible.
Deafy, who was deaf.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Stop it.
One of my absolute favorites, Gatsby.
He murders
Probably had
somebody
a
on Long
Sorry,
Island.
what?
Maybe a mustache with a suit.
I was gonna say, does he have carry around a glass of champagne all the time? I'm confused.
He's from Egg Harbor. It's
Chesty.
What?
Betty Boop. E.
I was gonna say, is that the female dwarf that they forgot about?
And my absolute favorite, Big O Ego.
I'm not even sure how they came up with that.
Big O ego. It's just pointless.
Well, can you imagine yelling it out? Hey, big O ego. Like, how do you?
Who?
many
I want
lines?
to know how it got past the point of tossing out the ideas that somebody actually wrote it down. It's like, yeah, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it might be Big O. Big O ego.
There you go. Didn't it say there was over 50 names that got
There were
rejected?
others. I wrote down. These are the ones I wrote down. The others were more towards those like personality archetypes. One of them, I believe, was actually Daffy. I don't know when Daffy Duck came out, so maybe it was during this, like during the run of this, they decided, we can't use that one. But the dwarves are what really give a lot of the heart and comedy to the story. So having them with personalities and having to be actual characters on their own really carries the middle part of this film completely. If you don't have those unique interactions in the whole scene where they're sneaking into the house, washing up and dancing, it's going to be kind of a boring film. One of the interesting things I learned about the story process with the dwarves and the gags is anyone who ever pitched a gag that made it into the final cut of the film always got a $5 bonus, which doesn't seem like a lot today, but that nice dinner Walt paid for to send them out before he called them back for the story meeting, they described as a really nice dinner that cost 50 cents. So this is them, the $5 thing is, going out for, to a nice steakhouse level bonus for just any individual gag. And I mean, the gag could be as simple as, the chipmunk who sneezes himself into the beer stein.
I love that part.
They didn't have to be long gags to get these bonuses. Hearing the story right after we meet the dwarves is one of the most really famous cut scenes from the movie because it really made it pretty far into the animation process, and that's the soup sequence. So one of the other elements that existed before but was changed was the Queen's transformation. It was different in different versions of the story. The Grimm version, the Queen turned into a beggar woman, but the Ames version had the Queen and the witch as two separate characters. So Walt kind of combines the two to be able to make his version and just have one villain in it.
And see, that goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Is it money or is it just knowing story? And that just seems like something Walt just inherently knew. There was with the Huntsman, and then if you're adding this beggar witch character as an addition, it gets overflowed, and it's just good that he saw that, and it makes the conflict that much more personal.
I think it also adds to the fact that he changed the storyline from having 3 incidents with the Queen where she tries to kill her, where you just have one climactic incident where the stakes on her life are that great. I mean, it's just tightening the story, right?
And there was another part of the story that Walt cut out here, which was somehow the prince ends up in the Queen's dungeon. I'm not really sure how that had worked in whatever version of the script they were using, but it was just something else where there were more sight gags and kind of morbid jokes that were part of this, but it was just cut for time and to simplify that story. The existing version, is already kind of scary enough in that scene. And one of the things I found out was in the UK, the movie originally got the equivalent of an R rating. No one under 16 was allowed to see it
Wow,
without their
really?
parents. Yeah. That eventually got overruled because the royal family really loved the movie, apparently. A lot of the
Bless England.
local councils,
God bless the Queen.
Yeah.
the local towns could override that too and change the rules and whatever. So that had happened a lot, but it was eventually completely overdone with, I believe, I guess it would be Elizabeth and her siblings were really into the movie in the late 30s. So, they said, well, if it's good enough for them, I guess it's good enough for all the kids. One cool part about that dungeon scene is it looks like a continuous shot of the Queen moving down the stairs, walking through the dungeon into her little workshop or whatever it is. But that's actually 3 backgrounds that were shot separately on the multiplane.
Wow.
And
That
we're just, they were just connected with another midground or foreground piece to block those scenes. I thought that was something really cool I never knew.
That is cool.
That's so incredible to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are those backgrounds that they could, put on a roller and roll so it looks like someone's walking, and they just paint a really long painting. I mean, there were even plays and film and things that would do that. There was some play in the, I think, 1880s that had like a mile-long canvas of the Mississippi, and they would talk about sailing down the Mississippi as this thing slowly rolled behind them. So that's the way they did a lot of backgrounds, but I guess this one was just so complex they had to break it up.
Well, I guess that makes sort of sense because she's going around the spiral staircase, right? I tried to film it just going, as one continuous thing. You wouldn't really be able to show her going around.
Yeah.
But that's again, just how they came up with that and figured out how to make it work is incredible.
So after the dungeon, we got another scene that they cut from the film that was in there. That was just, it was worked on pretty well, and there was a lot of art for it, but it just, didn't add anything. It was just another set of gags where the dwarves hold a meeting to discuss a present for Snow White, and then they build a bed. Just another, one of those dwarf gag scenes where everybody's personalities come up, and Dopey swallows something probably.
Oh, Dopey.
But it just didn't need to be there. So they get into the, finale right away. And in the Ames version, they actually did have a rabbit, hop along to the mine and warn the dwarves to bring her back. So, Disney had to one-up that and show what he could do with animation, and has basically the entire forest worth of animals come and drag the dwarves back to save her, even though they're not in time. But what that leads us to another element that Walt added was the chase and the death of the witch. That wasn't part of the older versions. In another version, she survives, she gets away, and they finally catch her at the wedding of Snow White to the prince, and then kind of put her in the dungeon and torture her for what she tried to do.
Not really sure which is worse.
Would have been a different movie for sure if there was more torture.
And this is where the effects animation of the film really came in. I mean, some of those lightning and rain effects are just unbelievably cool animation.
Yeah, we were reading a little bit about the special effects that they used for the evil queen when she's the hag, in the dungeon. The scene where she transforms between the evil queen to the hag, I can't find my original notes on specifically what techniques they use. That's what I've been looking for. But they used a brand new technique to make that swirly motion, because it's like there's a bunch of swirliness going on, and then all of a sudden she's transformed.
I do have that. They did base it off of a 1931 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That a lot of the transformation, the way it was done, was there. But there was there's some really cool elements where, all this, like the flashes, and you see the skeleton through her hands. It's just a lot of stuff that was never really seen before until that scene.
You go back and you think about it, and it's 1937, and when you said that scene with the staircase, that just blew my mind, because we're so accustomed to seeing these ridiculous animated films even before Toy Story hit. We just got so used to these visually stunning things that you just assumed it was always like that. And what they did to make this movie is nothing short of incredible.
Mm-hmm.
It actually makes me think a little bit about the process. You know, when as we're analyzing the process of how they made this film, in some ways, it kind of reminds me of how NASA engineers got to the moon. You know, because when you go and analyze their process, every single time they had a problem, they worked the problem, they solved it. You come to an issue, you work the problem, you solve it. It kind of seems like there's never a problem that they can't, when working together, just solve. So.
Mm-hmm.
And just like NASA, and you talk about, you know, necessity is the mother of all innovation, and they just innovated. They just found a way.
So that's basically a lot of the story development of the film. Gone through a few of the facts. There were 25 songs written for the film. I think there were 11 on the final soundtrack that included the reprises or so there's, I think, 8 total original songs. I'm Wishing, one song, With a Smile and a Song, Whistle While You Work, Hi Ho, the Dwarves Washing song, which is called Bluddle Uddle Dum.
It's where they go, brr, brr, brr.
I didn't realize it had a name.
It's one of the better dwarves gags.
I don't know if Bluddle Uddle Dum really counts as a name.
It totally counts.
Who? I mean, there is the guy's name is Works, so I guess that seems perfectly common.
And the actual name of the silly song is the Dwarves Yodel song. The silly song is the parenthetical for that. And then Someday My Prince Will Come. And I mean, how many of these are just absolute classics?
Pretty sure all of them play in the parks.
Yeah, they're just all
in one
there.
place or another, yeah.
And some of them are just the first thing you think about when you think about Disney animation. And that just speaks volumes that the very first film was so just historic, I guess is the word for it, that it became so synonymous with the Disney company, with animation as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And you just, to the point that every time a Disney film comes out now, you expect an amazing song.
And Walt really wanted it to be a musical, but he didn't want it to be the kind of musical they had at the time. Those kind of Busby Berkeley kind of things were not story driven. They were almost vaudevillian.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted the songs to serve the story, which is a much more modern kind of thing, much more, you know,
Right,
I'd say Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of probably brought that forward more than.
Well, I was just about to get to that, because you're talking about people who perfected the storytelling style of musicals 15 years later, after Walt. So he really was a pioneer, kind of realizing this is where music and movie integration is heading. You know, let's use it.
Snow White was played by Adriana Caselotti. Lucille Laverne played both the evil queen, who actually does have the name Grimhilda, according to the source I had, and also played the witch. Harry Stockwell is the prince, which I believe is actually actor Dean Stockwell's father. Roy Atwell as Doc. Pinto Colvig as Grumpy and Sleepy. Otis Harlan as Happy. Scotty Matrow as Bashful. Billy Gilbert as Sneezy. Eddie Collins as Dopey. When he was going to talk, Walt actually wanted Mel Blanc to do the Dopey voice, most notably for doing every single Looney Tunes character. The other two actors are Maroney Olson as the Magic Mirror and Stuart Buchanan as Humbert the Huntsman. So the Queen actually has a name. The Huntsman has a name. The Prince never had a name.
Well,
He didn't
at
need a
one
name.
point,
He was just the prince.
yeah, well, in earlier descriptions of the story, he was called Prince Oswald, I think. But that was like before they came up with this concept of him not being like a joke. I mean, because for a while it was a comedy, so they called him Prince Oswald, and then when that like got scrapped, he was just the prince. But there are some interesting facts about some of these actors that I read. Like for instance, how you were saying that Pinto Colvig plays Grumpy and Sleepy. He was the original voice of Goofy. So Bill Farmer can thank him. And Lucille Laverne, who played the Wicked Queen, this was her last movie she ever made.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Yeah. And then one of the most interesting pieces of information about the actors to me is the story about Adriana Caselotti. This is like really her life's work. She signed a contract with Disney saying that she wouldn't do any more work after this because they didn't want the voice, the sound of her, I guess, to be resold or re-imaged or reimagined by anybody else. So she kind of sold her career off just to do
Snow
this
White.
role. Right.
Wow.
Yeah, she's known for a couple of other small bit parts that she has no name of. By the way, she doesn't get any credit, but she did the everyone's seen Wizard of Oz, right? So you remember the song the Tin Man singing "If I Only Had a Heart"? Well, there's this line where he says something about Romeo, and then Juliet says some line in the line where I think she says, "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" That's her saying that.
Wow.
That's the only other thing she's known for, because again, she didn't get credit for it. It's a one-liner.
So originally I thought we would go by scene and describe the plot of this movie, but I think everybody kind of knows a lot of that. So we'll go through the movie and discuss things as we remember them, but I'm not going to give the detailed description. Like maybe some of the lesser known movies, we might go do that in the future. But let's start with the fact that it opens with the storybook and how much of a trope that's
Even
become
that
for Disney
becomes. Yeah.
I was looking, there's a list. I mean, it goes all the way. They did it in the 2011 Winnie the Pooh. Still, they were doing the opening with the book. And they've done other versions of it, with the clay pots and Hercules and Parchment and Pocahontas, and Brother Bear had the cave paintings. It's all that take on that same opening. They had it in shorts. They had it in so many different things. They do it in Enchanted.
Well, Enchanted is parodying Snow White, so.
Well, I mean, then you take it to the non-Disney area and you look at Kevin Smith when he ends when he ended before it became more profitable, the Escuniverse, and he has them close the book on it. It just becomes it's amazing that it became that trope that quickly, and it's in everything.
You said outside Disney. I thought you were going to bring up Shrek. Because I probably would have been 11, 12-ish, somewhere in there when Shrek came out. I didn't ever realize that it was a trope, I guess you could say, or recognize that it happened in all the Disney movies until I saw that gag at the opening of Shrek. I just took it for granted that it was at the beginning of pretty much every Disney movie, and that's how fairy tale movies started.
It's just something you think of, all the original set of princess movies all did it. So
up until Little Mermaid?
Little Mermaid didn't do it. It was the first of the modern era of the princess movies.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised they didn't do it because they kind of go back to it. Beauty and the Beast does it with a stained glass window.
Yeah.
And they use it for all the exposition we really get in the film is those 2 pages. And then, straight to the Queen in the mirror, which is just an amazing scene to open on. It's something with the fire effects, the distortion effects. It's something, they hadn't seen in animation. So
whenever we were watching, it might have been with the commentary or one of the behind the scenes on the DVD, the animator who animated the magic mirror said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done to this day. Well, I mean, to the point where he had, interviewed of the making of it, because he literally is just 2 moving pieces. But they were like, how do we actually make it look animated with just 2 pieces?
Then we go right from there to the introduction of Snow White and the Prince in about 30 seconds of song, and then right back to the huntsman and right to the woods. I mean, there's so much happening in the first 5-10 minutes of this film.
Mhm.
It's unbelievable, like the pace it goes, and I don't think you see that anymore at all.
I was gonna say, I think it's within what, the first 10, maybe 15 minutes that she's already in the woods having run away.
Yeah, it's about an 80-minute film, and the entire story takes place in like the first 15 and the last 15 minutes of the movie. In the middle is just those kind of gags, which does what adds the Disney touch to it and adds the heart to this story.
I think Laurel touched on it early. I think it was important to get the story in early as the hook because they're used to these being shorts. So if you're not jumping right into the story, you might lose people's attention. I mean, no one knew what was going to happen with this. So I think they made a really good choice hopping right into it and getting people hooked for the ride.
Now, let's just go right to the question. I was kind of my foundation for starting the show is, how do you remember this film the first time you saw it as a kid? And, what do you think about it? Watching it now as an adult, has that changed? Do you think differently of it, knowing the history? I mean, was this anybody's favorite Disney movie as a kid?
I think it was more of a rite of passage. Somehow the dwarfs come into your life, and then you eventually figure it out. I mean, I remember so many things that you just caught bits and pieces of that used to be on the Disney Channel, like in the bumpers and things like that. I forgot what they were actually called, but it was kind of like the Merry Melody shorts from Looney Tunes. You would just see a little bit, and then you eventually went back and saw the whole thing. I definitely wasn't my favorite, and I remember it more for the gags as a kid. And when I watched it as an adult, I was struck with, like everybody else, it's legitimately scary.
Yeah.
It is, and I remember it more from those moments from the Scary Adventures ride. I never really gravitated to watching this one over and over like I did a lot of these films, particularly because it was so late to VHS. And I remember how big of an event it was when it came out on VHS. They advertised it for months and months before it happened. And I think it was one of those ones that was the first one that says, this is really only going to be available for 3 months, and that's it. It was sold out, like, quickly.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking back, and the first time I might have seen the film, I might have seen it in a theatrical re-release.
I'm pretty sure I did, because I know I'd seen it before that VHS.
Yeah, I definitely could have seen it in 87 or 93. But I remember, I really wish I could think of the name of those little clips that always used to show that were there during the Disney Channel, especially when you had like the free Disney Channel month. Those were the best. But they would show like in between shows and bumpers and stuff like that. And it would be brief little clips. And I actually, when you said the soup scene wasn't in the movie, for some reason, as we're finding out through the show, that my memory deceives me, I always thought it was. I remembered that scene pretty vividly.
Yeah, those things that was always out there. I mean, 1956, that's, what, 2 years into the show? Into the Disneyland show?
It's entirely possible that they showed it as a clip on the Disney Channel, too, so...
Well, it would make sense if it was on the Disney Channel because a lot of the movies would have begun to air by the end of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But again, none of us really would have seen that, until we were, little kids at the end of the 80s. Because none of us really would have had it on videotape. We wouldn't have had access to it. I mean, for me, I didn't have access to this movie. We didn't have this. As a kid, like a small kid, my real memory of Snow White wasn't even the animated movie. My sisters and I, we watched the live action version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from Radio City Music Hall. I don't know if anyone remembers this, and I'm probably dating myself, but my dad, being from New York, thought it was totally cool that they did this. So they did it, I think in 1979 was when it was whenever it actually aired it at Radio City Music Hall, but it was filmed in 1980. And then released on HBO, I think like in 1987. So I would have been 3 or 4 at that time. So like we had a copy of it. So of course that's what we watched as kids. And we didn't watch the animated movie until it came out on VHS, in the 90s.
Yeah, I know I definitely saw either the 83 or or the 87, or maybe both. I know I was going to movies back in 83, but the only thing I remember going to see was Return of the Jedi. But yeah, it had that influence, even if it wasn't something we watched all the time. And I definitely think I appreciate it more now. I think I follow the story better. I appreciate the gags a bit more because they're not the simplest of gags all the time. There are some quick things that a kid might not catch.
Mm-hmm.
I still laugh my took us off on some of those gags. Like laughing out loud way too hard because they're really silly gags. My favorite gag is so you know how like the guys start singing hi ho and they're like packing up and they're getting ready to exit the mine. So they're throwing their heaps of jewels into their like underground, I don't know, like, you know, pantry, if you will, that they're about to lock up. Dopey is the last one to go in with his bag and he throws it and he like goes with the bag flying into this pantry. And I'm like sitting here laughing hysterically. And Ron's like, I didn't think it was that funny. I was like, it's just the most hilarious thing I've seen in a long time.
There's a moment right after that. I think it's one of those things I wouldn't catch as a kid, but I think it's really funny as an adult is, you know, they do all that, then they lock it up and then they hang the key right next to
on
the door.
Yeah, great idea. Let's just put the key right next to the door that locks it.
Maybe they're afraid
Why
the
not?
gems are going to escape, and that's why they're locking them up. But
Well, we never do get a really clear answer as to why they're mining them all and then just locking them up.
right, they
So
have
who knows?
they have a fortune in diamonds, but they all live in this little shack. Are
Yeah,
they just
together.
hoarding
And-
all the gems. I think
Speaking of their little shack, it's the most gorgeously, beautifully animated home. There's so much detail, like to their little house, all the little German house details. If you
Mhm.
go and you look at photos of like German homes from like, you know, history, like it looks just like it. So spot on.
and it is the house is probably the main set piece for the film, where just all the memorable scenes take place with the cleaning scene and the dwarves sneaking in. So that, you know, had to be so well developed. And one thing I really love is the water pump with the face on it. It's in a couple shots, but it's something that really stuck out when I was watching it again. And it's just such a cool piece. But like the way the cobwebs are done, the furniture isn't so beautifully carved. It looks like these little craftsmen would do it. And obviously the design for the dwarves came from the same place as like lawn gnomes came from, which is a German design. So that craftsmanship from that look would all fit in right there.
That's what I was about to chime in with when Laurel mentioned the houses. I remember the furniture so clearly, and it amazes me what they were able to accomplish. The detail is there.
But what they do is they set the stage for authenticity, because after that, that kind of becomes a staple of what we expect in Disney animated movies, is things to be seemingly authentic.
And I wish we could mention all the animators on this film. But, you know, that would be an extra hour to this podcast talking about all of them individually. This is like the birth of like the 9 old men concept, is these guys who did this and the ownership they took of individual characters.
Kind of going back to the first impressions, I actually didn't see this movie in theaters. I remember very vividly my grandma being so excited to buy it on VHS when it came out in 94. And she wanted us to sit down and watch it together. It's kind of a rite of passage thing. And I had seen, you know, pretty much every Disney movie that had come out either in theaters or on VHS up to that point. But she was so excited for us to watch this one. And I vividly remember I was, I guess, probably about 4 or 5. I remember being uncomfortable during the wood scene. And then it was kind of okay. And then the transformation scene, when she transforms into the old hag, I will never forget, and my grandma will never let me live it down. That was 1,000% nope, and I ran out of the room.
I'm not having this.
And I would not come back. I don't think I saw the last third of that movie. actually saw it until I was probably about 11 or 10, like 10 or 11. It terrified me, and I could not bring myself to watch it until years later. I knew what happened through like riding the ride and kind of just osmosis of knowing.
Right.
And the little
pop
bump.
culture.
Yeah. So I knew what happened, but I could not bring myself to get past the transformation scene anytime I sat down to watch it from that first time until I was about 10 years old.
Do you have to say, as much as I like those gag scenes, like there is no story development for the middle third of this film at all. It's all just introducing these characters for fun. So that is, I think, why it wasn't one of my favorites as a kid, because it just does move slowly, and there's a lot of gags, but I rather watch a good 40 minutes of goofy cartoons to get 10 times as many gags as that.
We gave Walt a lot of compliments for structuring the story, and there had to be a reason behind that, why he wanted to stick with that large amount of gags in such a quick succession. And the story is basically in the first chunk and then the last chunk. And we talked about, first feature length. So I think this is just, you get story, you're hooked, and now you're getting the stuff you expect from an animated thing. And now we're going to bring you back to the story.
I mean, again, it's a very well laid out story, but you almost kind of wonder if that was almost to pad the runtime a little bit to make it the feature length amount of time. Because like Laurel said, you get the story, you're hooked in the first third, you see, the gags and everything that you expect, and then you're back to the movie in the last third. And so your brain almost, you sit back and you think about it and you're like, wow, there wasn't a lot of character development. But as you're watching it, it does almost trick your brain into thinking that there was, to hold your attention. Just because it is that rapid succession of gags that you have to, that you register and enjoy, and then you're back in the story.
I don't think it really draws too much away, like the first time you see it or the first time you've seen it in a while. Because I watched this movie 3 or 4 times over the past couple of weeks prepping for this. And the first time I watched it, I'm kind of engrossed in it again. But, by the third or fourth time, it's like the scene isn't adding anything. And the scene of them sneaking into the house is really long. And they do the same jokes a couple times. Dobie poking out through somebody else's beard as they're poking their heads in the door. And it's cute, and it gets kids, and it's, it really showed off the animation, which is
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
Incredibly gorgeous. Most of the animation in this film can hold up to anything even in Princess and the Frog and Winnie the Pooh, those latest animated films. There's really some gorgeous elements, and they really had to work on that. I mean, they had a palette of 1,500 paints. There was no digital at the thing. They had 1,500 colors for this film.
So you know how Snow White had this rosy cheekness
to her face? Yes.
The ink and paint women used real makeup to make her face have that natural makeup rosy glow. Right. And wait, the best part about it is, I'm not sure if it was Walt or their manager, somebody said, well, how are you going to make the makeup look the exact same in every single frame? And the girls were like, we look like this every single day. Like, we've got this makeup thing down.
Yes, we got this part. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, they're like, don't worry about it. We got it. But I think as a kid, I always wondered, how did they make her face look so natural?
One thing I want to give the animation as much credit it deserves, because it is gorgeous and every element of it is great. But watching it a few times, especially on Blu-ray, that there are elements backgrounds always look different from foregrounds, and you can tell the colorations of parts that are going to move and stuff like that. But Snow White herself almost looks like she's in a different universe than the rest of the characters. And it's really evident.
Ethereal kind of look to her almost, yeah.
When she's grabbing the dwarves' heads as they're leaving and giving everybody the goodbye kiss on their way to the mine, it almost looks like something out of Roger Rabbit with a live action interact with the cartoon. They're just so different styles. And I'm not saying either was drawn badly, either was animated badly. It's just that she's got a soft focus on her, I think would be the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Everybody else is filmed in kind of a more rigid, and that's probably on purpose to make her. I mean, the queen a little bit too.
But do you think it's on purpose to make her stand out? Like, because obviously the dwarves are caricatures, right?
Yeah.
Like bigger heads, smaller limbs, clothes are a little bit awkward, but they wanted her to look a little more perfect. So I guess that makes sense.
She
I
has
think-
softer features in
I
general.
was gonna say, Patrick hit it. She looks kind of ethereal. I think that goes back to the purity and goodness, and she was, a little too good to be true. She shouldn't look completely rigid and 100% natural because she's supposed to be not better, but
above it, kind of.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
Did anybody have any? We've talked a few gags. Is there any like particular moments that really stood out for you?
Dopey with the diamonds.
His eyes?
Yes.
Yeah, that's always the one I go to. That's my favorite.
It's a good moment.
I think a lot of us just relate to Dopey because I think that's how we felt as a kid. We felt like we were always tripping over something and getting in the way. He's such a relatable character without saying anything.
Watching it the last few times, I really developed an affection for Grumpy. No, because he is.
I get it. All right.
No, he's the one who gets the most embarrassed, and when he gets to kiss goodbye, he's the one who leads the charge back to save her. He is, he really is kind of the hero of the dwarves. As gruff as he wants to be, he isn't really that on the inside, and that's something I really kind of began to like watching this more and more to do this. But the diamond moment, they use it so much that it is just such a great moment. The animals cleaning was something I didn't remember from being a kid.
What? How could you forget?
No. No, not that they
The
were
little
doing
tails that dusting. Oh.
But those little moments, I did remember the dusting with into the mouse hole and the mouse getting angry, like all those little gags.
Licking the plates, and she goes, "No, put them in the tub."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, of course, like tub."
How silly is me, a wild animal, to not know the dishes go in the tub.
We're like, I love this scene when, like we were just talking about before, but where the little chipmunk sneezes itself into the stein. Like, come on, only in Germany.
The chipmunk, there's one of them taking down the cobwebs, and then there's another one taking down a spider web, and the spider crawls down and gets in his face.
Yeah.
Oh, also, I didn't realize this was before Chip and Dale were characters too.
I love the dancing scene too with her and Dopey.
Yes. Well, how kooky and unique is it to have the concept of the two of them standing together?
Muppet Man.
Yeah. But you know what's so great about that? Now that character is in the parks of the two of them together standing on their shoulders. Like, why didn't they ever bring this into the parks until like the last millennia? I would have preferred to see that than Snow White and the Prince if I had to pick a character meet and greet.
And that's one of two scenes they have on the mine train ride. Let's talk about that influence. About obviously Snow White has to have its place in the parks, but just how much there is. I mean, it's it's in all the parades, obviously, but and Snow White's Scary Adventures is in every park but Hong Kong and Shanghai, and Shanghai opened with Mine Train. I'm surprised it's not in Hong Kong, but because they built everything so cheap, I didn't think the cardboard ride would have been that expensive to put in. But
Don't be so cruel about the Scary Adventures. That was like the best ride. When I was a kid, it was a big deal when my parents let me go on by myself. Like I remember the experience of riding it by myself for the first time. Like, big deal. Okay.
It was genuinely a scary ride for kids. I remember I was even an older kid. I was probably about 10, and I'm on the ride with my one of my aunts is sitting behind me, and in the middle of the woods scene, she just grabs my shoulder and just completely flips out.
I'm so sorry.
And it was sad to see it go at Disney World, and it's good that it's still at most of the other parks.
Did you know that that was an opening day attraction?
Yeah, it opened Disneyland, Disney World, Disneyland Paris, and Tokyo Disneyland. And it's gone back and forth between just being Snow White's Adventures, Snow White's Scary Adventures. They didn't add her to the ride. Like, they didn't add a Snow White figure to the ride to the 80s.
Yeah, because I was going to say, weren't you originally supposed to be going through the ride almost from her point of view?
Right.
Like, you were supposed to be Snow White. And then, of course, you know, we always joke about tourists, but tourists didn't get it. So they had to retroactively go back and put her in the ride.
Well, now it's Princess Fairy Tale Hall, right? That's where the fairy tale meeting, or the Princess meet and greet is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think she's one of the ones that's always there, but I think she's one of the rotational princesses. But she's also at all the dining. She has a set meet and greet at Epcot.
In Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't there a Snow White wishing well at Disneyland?
There is, and it's gorgeous.
That's also at Hong Kong, the Grotto. It is a really cool like water feature with all the little statues on it. It's something that they could tuck somewhere into the Magic Kingdom for just a couple bucks, and it would really add to it. But we have the there's the wishing well we have,
right?
But we don't have the whole grotto, and obviously now we have the mine train here and at Shanghai, and that gets a lot of flack for being not a real roller coaster, but it's really just a cool dark ride.
I think my biggest pet peeve about Mine Train is not the whole coaster, kiddie coaster, dark ride thing. It's just, it feels like it sells this epic story a little bit short. I feel like there should be a little bit longer. And especially when we pull into the station and right before we unload, we get that great scene. I just want more of that. And I'm one of the few people, I know this is going to be shocking, I never rode Scary Adventure. I went back to the park as an adult, and I was with a bunch of dude bros, and we were like, dude, bro. And we couldn't go on that. And by the time I became more of a refined Disney fan, it was gone.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you and your inner child.
Yeah.
You'll just have to go to Disneyland and see it.
I might have ridden it as a child, but I don't have a memory of it. The only thing I have a memory of is Figment.
I don't mind Mine Train for what it is. I do agree with Patrick and Laurel. I wish there were more. I don't know how in the world they would do it, but I do wish there were more show scenes from the story rather than just the mine and then the one at the end.
As good as they are, there needs to be more. I mean,
absolutely.
The mine train scene is what sells that ride to me, because it's just so incredible going up that lift hill with the dwarves singing, and so well done in animatronics with I'm not a big fan of the projection faces, but I think it works on the dwarves.
It works on them. Some other places it doesn't work, but for them, I don't know if it's just they plussed up the technology or just got it right. But it definitely works better for them than for most of the areas where they've added it.
One of my issues about the Mine Train, like everyone was like we were saying, is the story is just flat. But the entire design of the ride feels like a train version of the Frozen ride. You kind of get this hint of character, this good song that has been overplayed because it's hi-ho, and then again you get a smidgen of intensity because you go on that little coaster part, and then you get to the end and it's the wham bam climactic story end, yay, but that kind of seems to be the rhythm of what they're doing now for designing these rides that are supposed to be depicting like a 100-minute movie.
And there's other attractions we missed. There was always a big segment in the Mickey Mouse Review, which for those who don't know, that was an animatronics version basically of PhilharMagic, which was the original attraction where PhilharMagic is now. They would get from different movies with animatronic versions of all the characters singing. And there's also a Snow White segment on the Golden Mickey's version that appears on the cruise line, not the version that appears in Hong Kong.
Right.
So she has almost no real presence in Hong Kong, it seems like.
And no castle. Not that she ever gets to a castle, But
I was
like,
gonna say you kind of see. I get the
Isn't there like
princess
a
castle in the background
clouds? Like yeah, somewhere
kind
back
of
up here in the corner, maybe.
that you kind
or-
of see them riding
the-
up to at the very, very end. Yeah,
Well, the opening actual shot is a castle, but
right.
it's
But you don't see the full shape of the castle, right? You just kind of open into like the castle gardens where she's sitting by the well. Am I
Right,
remembering
and
that
then
correctly?
you see
yeah,
the
I think
whole
that's correct.
you see the castle from a distance, but it's kind of blurry and it's not as fairy tale
Hmm.
as a lot of the later ones. It looks very much like I'm not going to say the name of it. The one that Cinderella Castle is actually based on Nussbauer or something like that.
Hmm.
It
Oh,
looks very much like
Yes.
the real version of that with a very blocky castle with a few spires. So it's nothing that stands out like the other one. So I understand why she doesn't have that. And also, it's up, at this by the time they even built the first castle, the movie had been released in theaters how many times? And it's not something that they had to sell. And Walt was all about using the parks to sell something. Snow White sold itself.
By the way, Cinderella's castle is modeled after Bavaria's Neuschwanstein Castle.
As far as the castle thing goes, I mean, from the building of the park's perspective, it makes sense because the whole reason they picked Sleeping Beauty was to advertise Sleeping Beauty.
right.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but they picked Cinderella Castle for Disney World because wasn't that Walt's favorite? I am kind of surprised that she doesn't have a castle, but at the same time, it makes sense. I do wish that somewhere around Mine Train or somewhere in the parks, like I do love in Disneyland, the Wishing Well Grotto. It's a beautiful, quiet little spot off to the side of Sleeping Beauty Castle, and you hear all the stories of all the cute moments. I've seen a couple, proposals or cute, sweet moments like that. I did actually see it was super cute. A wife told her husband that they were expecting at the Wishing Well, and it was adorable. The proposals, you always see pictures of those. The other cute one I've seen online is the little girl wishing for daddy to come home, and she turns around and dad's in his uniform. That's where that was. So it's a beautiful, quiet area. I do wish there was a little bit more for her though, especially out there, whether the dwarves' house, maybe if they actually built their house somewhere, that would be awesome.
Oh, like a walkthrough?
Yeah, like a walkthrough, or have a meet and greet area, whether it's the dwarves or her, or kind of interchange them. That would be really cool to have.
Part of me kind of wonders, like you said, if there was a way to integrate a little bit more Snow White, but like less Snow White and more movie stuff. So like if there was an opportunity other than just going to the Halloween party to see all 7 dwarves in one photo, I mean, that would be really nice. Yeah.
It's amazing how wildly popular that meet and greet is. It's crazy, and it obviously shows that Snow White is important to the history of the company, where she has been in some way an opening day attraction everywhere. It almost feels like this should have some part at Hollywood Studios because of the way it affected the film industry and any remnants of having Hollywood actually in Hollywood Studios.
But you would think that there would be something in Hollywood Studios that sort of explains the techniques that were basically brought into light, and what created long, extended film animation.
Right, because I know they do, or at least they did, touch on it briefly in One Man's Dream, but as much as I enjoy that, it is kind of sensory overload. As far as all the things to look at and all the little blurbs to read. And so I think it does still even kind of get lost even in there, how big of a technological achievement it was. And I do agree. I wish there was something, maybe add on or do a separate film history.
Yeah.
Really give this its due.
I was going to say, we talk about her not having the castle, but one of the park icons is the theater the movie premiered at, specifically for that reason, the Carthay Circle.
Oh, yeah.
Is the theater.
Oh, that's true. In California Adventure, I forgot. They went back and added that as the
icon. now.
And oh, it is technically at studios.
Right.
I forgot, it's the shop, and if you listen, you actually hear the premiere audio playing in the store from time to time, which I always thought was a cool touch. But no, you think somewhere in that animation pavilion, I mean, again, it's kind of going away from that now, especially now that the animation studio is closed and even the workshop is closed. But you'd think somewhere over in there they would have had some kind of not dedication, but little mini museum to the history of animation and have a big section devoted to this movie.
Wouldn't it be nice if they took the one man's dream, which in and of itself is more of like the history of Walt than is the history of animation? What if they kind of took that space and just did a whole section about the pivotal elements of technology that Disney really, helped implement? Like, for instance, the things that they use in the animation.
That stuff's all been there. It's just you have to kind of read it. And
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's there, it's touched on, but I think it gets lost in people focusing on wanting to learn about Walt's life. Not that that's a bad thing. That's the purpose of that space. But it would be nice if they had a separate space devoted to the history of Disney film, I guess, where this kind of stuff could really be highlighted and celebrated for what it was.
Well, it would be being torn out now anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
That's true.
Sad but true.
But the archives should have like a lot of this stuff available. I mean,
I think they do. They just don't have a place to display it.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, they do at the expos. They have their little museum, but even that's really devoted to the movies versus devoted to their organization as a whole and how they've changed the industry.
And that's where the family museum comes in. It pays attention to a lot of that stuff. I haven't been there, but I know they have so much of the art and all that. And we said they have one of the multiplanes. So, I mean, that's really where you have to go to see this. And I think that's where you're going to have to go to see it for a long time with what's happening to the studios.
So going back to Snow White in the parks, can we talk about Snow White inspired merchandise for a minute? I mean, because like, because the Snow White, well, it might take more than a minute, but there is Snow White merchandise all over the parks. I mean, this is kind of just what it sells. Okay. So they're going to make more. I mean, there's all sorts of Snow White stuff. There's Snow White clothes. They have the Snow White Halloween ears with the, you know what I'm talking about, with the apples.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the poison apple is everywhere. I can see it behind Ron.
We got it with candy corn ice cream in it. Which
lie.
I was, I mean, it was delicious, but I was expecting a creepy tasting candy corn flavored ice cream.
Well, I mean, well, you can get candied apples. At least you could. I want to say that look like that, right?
Yeah.
I think they do, especially around. Yeah, especially around
Halloween
Halloween season, they have those. And obviously, like candy and food items are based off of the Snow White franchise. But really, like, I mean, just alone individually being like the first princess. I mean, there's first princess and first villain everywhere.
Her dress has to be one of the most common I see in the parks on little girls.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for the costumes for Bippity Boppity Boutique? Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's so common in the Disney bounding type stuff that people do with the just.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think part of that is the ease of doing that one because.
Right, just 3 colors. And then you can really do anything with your hair, in terms of
as long as you
pieces.
have the red ribbon in it.
Right, right.
And it stands out much more than like Aurora's or Cinderella's
because of the primary colors.
Yeah, right. Because you recognize as soon as you see it if somebody's wearing yellow and blue. Oh,
and red.
Yeah, she's Disney bounding. I do think it's interesting because we talked about how the movie itself doesn't necessarily get the recognition it deserves, and now we're talking about how well the merch sells. I mean, I know my little sister, the first trip to Disneyland. Grandma and Grandpa took us. They let us, each pick out a princess dress. She was 3 years old and instantly gravitated to Snow White. And I'm 99% sure she'd never seen the movie, didn't know who Snow White was, but that was the dress she wanted. and she wanted all the merch to go with it. And until she got a little bit older and saw Sleeping Beauty, that was her princess. And so it's just incredible how well the merchandise sells, and she is recognized in that way. But so many people say, yeah, I think she's really cute, or, you know, they Disney about as her and all this. But, you know, you ask people, have you actually watched the movie? And a lot of them haven't. It's just kind of through that pop culture osmosis that they know who she is. They know the main highlights of the movie, but they've never actually seen it. I just think that's kind of weird and interesting.
And
I think it might be one of the few movies that do kind of have that pop culture iconicness to it, whereas people might have actually sat and watched it. Probably like on the scale of Gone with the Wind.
we were saying how little there is in the parks, but the more I think about it, there is things like 2 of the candy stores, Sweet Spells and Candy Cauldron,
I
Yeah.
was just thinking
are
that.
based off of it. I mean, there's these little things I guess we just don't think about and we just miss.
I think maybe what we're coming to realize is it is a little bit more subtle for Snow White. It's not as in your face as Beauty and the Beast even, or
Right.
Beauty and Cinderella, obviously. They do have this subtle little nods. Because again, I don't think necessarily that people, which is a tragedy, have seen the movie, but you do kind of recognize who she is. And then for those who do know the movie, and especially the history, recognizing Carthay Circle as, you know, for what it is, there are those touches for them there. It just kind of maybe takes you a minute to realize that they are there.
One more thing I wanted to discuss that's not in the parks anymore, but was there the old dwarf costumes? Has anybody seen video of
Yes.
these?
They're almost
What?
as bad as the old Mickey Mouse ones. Mickey
But-
and Minnie.
Yeah.
They're
Like,
terrifying.
Yes.
all horrifying. I think back to, you know, Mickey is this beloved character in the cartoons, and, you know, all this merchandise sold in the 30s and 40s, and you see it, it's absolutely horrifying. Like, how did children enjoy these plushes and these toys? Because
They're creepy
Mickey
looking.
looks like he's going to kill you. And especially when you meet him as the character, it's horrifying.
Going back to Snow White merchandise, do you guys remember having any Snow White merchandise as kids? I know that we had the little golden books and maybe some other book series that was Snow White. But did you guys have anything else like that?
I remember I think I had a plush of some sort of one of the dwarves. It might have been like a Happy Meal thing, or, you know,
Maybe
something
a
like that.
Dopey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I had a plush. Again, I know my sister had a bunch. And then I also remember Burger King did those animated.
Oh, the glasses.
The cups? Yes, I have a Snow White one somewhere. And that's probably the only thing really, other than probably a little golden book, that I personally had. And
Yeah.
maybe a plush that I can't. I feel like I had a Dopey plush, but I won't swear to that.
Alfred Angelo does multiple Snow White dresses as a part of their wedding dress line.
They do.
Yeah,
They
they're beautiful.
came out right after the Disney-inspired dresses really became huge right after we got married. So thankfully, we were able to avoid that expense. But
They
we
were
did
big-
we
they
did
were a
serve
big
a
deal when I
poison
got
apple.
married. Oh, you
Yeah.
did?
Yeah,
Oh.
we had a poison apple martini.
Oh my God, that is too awesome. Yeah, they were a big deal when I got married. But I, you know, we did a Haunted Mansion themed wedding, so none of these romantic dresses were going to cut it for that. So,
I looked at the princess dresses when I got married. They've also introduced jewelry now, apparently. There's a princess engagement wedding ring jewelry line. I don't know exactly who does it, because again, unfortunately, that came out after I had already gotten married.
I want to talk about a fact that I found about a canceled prequel. I've been dying to talk about this the whole time.
Wait, what?
A canceled prequel. Okay,
How did
it's out there. Well, it's not really out there because it never was made, but let me explain. So sometime in the early 2000s, I think it was through Disney Toon Studios that they started development of what was going to be a computer animated prequel.
Oh dear God.
Yeah, it was supposed to be more, I think, about the dwarves, and it was going to be titled The Seven Dwarfs. Mike Disa was directing it. Evan Spilatopoulos, sorry, I'm probably butchering that, was screenwriting it. And then they pitched the story about how all the dwarves met and how the evil queen, and how the evil queen like killed Snow White's father. So like kind of like that pre-story that we don't really touch on, that we all have questions about, of course, from the original movie. How she got her throne and all this stuff. And it was all going to be done through Toon Management, through Disney Toon Management. And then they eventually like changed the story to like be more centered around Dopey and his story and like why he becomes mute. And then this like evidently there's this backstory about him becoming mute because of him watching the death of his mother. And it was like a gruesome death. I know, like crazy. And this was after Disney purchased Pixar. So then there was this, like, I think it was around 2005, 2006. And John Lasseter gets his like hands on this story, and he's like, "No, we're not doing this. Canceled."
Oh, thank goodness for John Lasseter.
But like, oh my God!
I feel as though Disney. I mean, I know that in that time frame, we got some really atrocious like prequels and sequels to classic Disney. I do think even though everybody in the Disney fan community, it's not our favorite movie, we do. And obviously, if you're watching this, you're like us, and you wanted to learn the history about it a little bit more. But there's at least that recognition and that understanding that this is a classic. You don't touch it. I feel like if that had gone out, somebody would have legitimately burned the studio to the ground.
I was actually going to comment about the Snow White live adaptations. Since there's a Rose Red movie that's been in development since last year, which is supposed to be about like Snow White's
a live
sister,
action, didn't they?
Disney didn't do it.
No, Disney was working.
Disney didn't do one of them. I thought Disney did one of the two. Not the terrible Kristen Stewart Snow White and the Huntsman, but the other one that came out around that time.
No, that wasn't Mirror Mirror, I believe it was called.
Yeah. But no, I
wasn't
think she's right. Sometime last year, at the end of the year, there was an announcement about a potential feature-length live-action movie for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with Aaron Cressida Wilson. But there were still negotiations on the script as of last October. So we don't. I mean, we would have to even find out where the updates were on that.
Well,
and I think what's also really interesting is how Snow White is the quintessential circled character for Once Upon a Time. Like everything circles around Snow White and Prince Charming.
Well, it did, and then that kind of went off the rails in its own weird way. But
yeah.
One of the those movies that came out at the same time, the Snow White and the Huntsman and Mirror Mirror, were both piggybacking on the 75th anniversary of the animated film. Disney was working on one. I believe they were trying to do like some sort of new like action adaptation, because I believe there was like Snow White and the Order of the Seven, where it was like a Seven Samurai kind of combo film. That was in
I want to
development.
know how that. What?
Yeah.
So what would they do? Turn the dwarves into like badass assassins? Like what's happening here?
Yes, that was kind of the plan. Was like she went and hid with some. It was going to be set in like China or something. I know this. It was something that was changed and redeveloped, and it was shelved so many times.
And I think we go back to what we talked about. That was a huge point about how Walt just got story. He understood story. And these other people who take cracks at this movies miss. They just miss. You have star power. You have, effects. You have multi-million-dollar budgets. And if you don't have story, it's going to be trash. And that's what we saw with a lot of those.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, at least in the defense of Once Upon a Time, Jennifer Goodwin's portrayal of Snow White, especially in those first two seasons, is fantastic.
Actually mention Once Upon a Time as much as humanly possible. Those people love hearing about their show. Yeah, Once Upon a Time did a great job with Snow White and really fleshed out her story.
One of the other things I'd like to mention also is that Snow White is a feature from the Descendants franchise. And so you know how she's the daughter, the evil queen,
Evie,
and then Evie, right, yeah. So
yeah, that's right. I know my DComs.
Actually, I do have a short list of trivia that I found. The writing on the Queen's spell book, it was not a part of the original background. And the reason for this was so that the writing could be added in different languages later for like showing the films in different countries. So like there are a number of other parts in the movie where you see like words written there where they actually animated different languages. So in terms of folktale mythology, the apple symbolizes immortality and like man's fall to sin and temptation and stuff. So it's interesting. It makes sense why they would use it in the fairy tale. It's kind of that thing that basically brings her to sin and then gives her immortality.
Oh, wow. It's right there.
Well, is it mind blown?
No, but I just feel stupid for not realizing it sooner. It's just so right in front of you.
Want to thank everybody for tuning in to our first episode of Drawn from the Vault. We'll be back in a few weeks. We're going to be working our way forward through the Disney animated classics. So the next on the list will be Pinocchio. So you guys could follow us on WDWNT's YouTube channel. If you have any comments, you can email us at vault@wdwnt.com or our Twitter at WDWNT So once again, I want to thank my panel, Patrick Hackett.
Hey.
Ashley Jasmer.
Hey.
And my wife, Laurel, here.
Good night, everyone.
All right, thanks, everybody, and we'll see you guys again in a few weeks.
Bye, my lady.